City of Cockburn, take 2. In the early days, we had the Prismics, the Zadarovs, the Gaspers, Sandwiches, the Summiches, the Brenzies, the Hoys, Radniches, Mulcairys, the Monikers, the Torsagas. You could go on naming them. The personnel that have contributed so much to our city of Cockburn. I've only just named a few of our overseas settlers, and their children today still play a big part in our district. In other words, they've carried on the good work as set by their ancestors. You know, I was considered a privilege to meet most of these gentlemen years ago, and Cockburn certainly were the gain on them deciding to settle in Cockburn. John and Margaret Owen, where the Owen Road today is in Hamilton Hill. In the early 1900s, they had a dairy farm in this vicinity. Their children used to help on the farm, and later went to college and still play their part in the district today as medical practitioners. Once again, had their start in Hamilton Hill, Cockburn. Now almost on the corner of where the Phoenix Park School is. That land at one stage was market garden by one of our pioneers and councillors, Mr. Jimmy Parrott. And of course on the corner of Phoenix and Rockingham Road was also a big area of many acres of flowers marketed by the Paulick brothers. Once again subdivisions came through, and the Paulick brothers are now further south. This home I'm filming now, that was the home of Nick Marriage, one of the first consuls in Cockburn for the Yugoslav community. Also this land here, next to the Phoenix Park School, we had George Goodchild down on Hamilton Road market gardening, and the area where I'm filming now belonged to his brother Jim. His son today is one of the meat wholesalers through the metropolitan area, and Jim used to do similar on this property. As you can see, we're not that far from the ocean. There's the hills in the background. This pine tree down the end of Sussex, or more or less down from Sussex Street in Kent Street, between Sussex and Hamilton Road, that must have been planted about the turn of the centuries, and the homestead that used to be next door to that on one side was the Hyams, and the other side was the Fletchers. Now the Fletchers was initially the Sarah Stroyers, and I mentioned Sarah because she was the one evidently that was there more than her husband, because he was up north a lot and played a prominent part in many ways in Beale with a little post office store. The Hyam family, they married into the Hines family. and they are still in the vicinity of Cockburn today. Certainly a landmark, that pine tree in Spearwood. One of the first halls in the district, South Coogee Agricultural Hall, built in 1919, and it replaced the old hall in the old present Cockburn Road, which is the old Rockingham Road, down by the Lighthouse magazine area. 1921 they utilised it as a school, 12 pupils, 7 Andersons, 3 Newmans, 2 Colosses. In other words, the Newmans, Colosses and Andersons comprised the school in 1921. At the rear of this is the Russell Road recreational ground, which is also played a part in Cockburn in the early days of the Spearwood Rovers Soccer Club cricket team, where Laurie Stall learned all his cricket. Agricultural Hall, South Coogee, 1921-1988. Still has quite a bit of use to this day. You can see it's always been a busy road. Rockingham Road, South Coogee. This little place here in Rockingham Road in Spearwood was built around the World War I era, and just in this vicinity here was all poultry yards. It was owned by a Mr. Pitts, an ex-army captain who retired here, British captain. He sold out in the 30s to Joe Corello, and he built dwelling out in the naval base area on round about the 11-mile peg on the Rockingham Road, which is still there today. And as you can see, Mr. Corello purchased the land, built these lovely homes. But there was thousands and thousands of range chooks in the early days of Cockburn. I had previously filmed the market garden and fruit growing area of Mere and Brindle's. When they first come to Spearwood at the turn of the century, they built themselves a little timber framed home, but in the latter years, or around World War I area or just turned, they built this lovely limestone tiled roof home. Mere and Brindle's, Spearwood. This store here today, Rockingham Road opposite the old Spearwood School, was one of the first in Cockburn. Originally it was built from the demolishing of the hall, etc., the community centre basically over in the old Cockburn, or present Cockburn Road, the old Rockingham Road down by the lighthouse, and was originally built by the people of Spearwood as a Spearwood co-op. Was first managed by Mr. Ablett for quite a few years. We think it was built around about the end of World War I. Mr. Ablett ran it for the co-op for a few years, and then it was bought by the Hines brothers, Alf and Bert. As we had previously discussed, the Hines brothers with their building activity throughout Cockburn. Also they owned quite a few stores around Fremantle, general wholesale stores, and they purchased this store in Spearwood. They ran it for quite a number of years. Naturally there's been work done on it, there's been additions put on and so forth over the years, and then it was bought by them days as a Mr. Hibbard and a Mr. Element, and for many years Mrs. Hibbard, who today is Mrs. Doust, She ran that store for must have been the best part of 30 years. Wally Gordon was the proprietor after Mrs. Doust, and then since then it has changed hands quite a number of times, and today it is also owned by one of the old Slav families in Beale, the Saparovits. Young George Saparovich, he ran it for quite a number of years. Although I mentioned previously in relation to the Hansons, the bakers in Spearwood, I'd like to mention a little more. I think it's very interesting. This, in 1896, Theo Hanson arrived in Fremantle, and it wasn't much longer that it took him to, in other words, it wasn't very long before it took him to build this bakehouse and start bread deliveries. He also built, just after building the bakehouse, this little cottage here, and from there he operated with the horse and baker's cart for many years, deliveries around Spearwood, Ham Hill, Coogee, Jandakot. They seem to think that it would have been around about World War I when things really took off. Now that little door there would be where they loaded millions of loaves of bread through that, loading their carts. And across here you can see this little building here. That is where he started his ice making factory, and also where they used to cut their meat up that was delivered. And I'm told that the reason for the high roof was there's a cellar underneath, and they used to have a lift that used to drop and lower for cooler temperatures for the meat, etc. In latter years, his son Dowie took over the business, and by this time, around the 1925 era, the Beale estate was in full blossom, and therefore he purchased 2 Dodge vehicles where he made his deliveries throughout the Beale estate, Rockingham. In other words, the day there consisted of daylight till into dusk for his workers. It's just to visualise in the early days before the trucks, they had horse and cart, they went all the way to Beale estate. And I had stated earlier in relation to the Hansons purchasing some vehicles in relation to the delivery of their bread. Well, that there was the first, one of the first that was purchased. They purchased 2, and for many, many years that was pride and joy of the delivery. Shots were the early days of the heel buses through Spearwood. Unoccupied. I was still on the property of what was, up till a couple of years ago, a prominent market garden in Spearwood. But once again, as you can see, subdivisions are pushing them all out. Now this is typical of the home that was built around World War I by the community of Cockburn, timber frame, weatherboard, iron roof. There's any number of homes throughout Cockburn this style. Now this is typical of the old and the new. This is most of the homes throughout Cockburn are today. This one was built in 1965. In the old days, this was as far as the bus from Fremantle used to come, corner of Barrington Road and Rockingham Road. Later on they extended it to South Coogee, Russell Road, and then through to Rockingham. Steve Uricic also came to the district as a boy. He, in his early manhood, purchased this property, lived in this home, and as I said, 20 odd years ago built this beautiful home. Also typical of the old buildings, these are a later version of the timber frame, completely stone. Iron roof. This one is down with by the old 6 Mile, not far from the ski park, and belongs to the Radnich family. It's been in the Radnich family for many, many years. And as you can also see, the old sheds as they were in that era. Lovely homes, the veranda all round. This little home here on the corner of Reserve and Railway Parade, on the junction. You may have heard Mr. Savella say to Alan Thomas, the first home he lived in Spearwood in the 20s, he built it. Well, this is the little place that was built. You look at the stone, how well it is all cut and all fitted together. As you can see, the reveal there is all stone. In 1903, the junction of Carrington Street and Rockingham Road was when the Hamilton Hill School was built. But unfortunately, only a matter of weeks ago, it was burnt down to the extent they could only salvage 2 classrooms. What a pity. And after World War I, this hall was, for many years, the most prominent hall in Cockburn. Used quite extensively and still is to this day. Had a few modifications done internally. Extensions put on this side, as you can see the difference in the iron on the roof. This is Hamilton Hill Memorial Hall. Spearwood had a place up in Sussex Street. And in latter years I have moved there as a memorial to be with the hall at Hamilton Hill. Very, very busy junction, as you can see by the traffic that's moving all the time. RSL Hall, Cockburn. Road, Hamilton Hill, is where the Pattersons had their dairy farm from around about 1913-14. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, into their 80s, are still on the property today. But this corner was entirely one big dairy farm around about the World War I era. That was their little dairy shed. Clontarf Road, Hamilton Hill. The old pioneer personnel dwellings. Parish Hall, Mel Road and Spearwood. It was opened in 1916 and for many, many years was the hub of the area for it's not, besides being its church services, but there used to be fortnightly dances here. The MC them days, and it was, shall I say, in the early days, was Harry Hansen, in other words, Dowie Hansen. They used to have gymnastics in the hall, mini concerts in the hall. The pianist on most occasions was Joe Miguel, and the Bolger concert group used to perform. Joyce Abley and her group used to perform. Very, very popular hall in its day, from 1916. Although it has been in disrepair for a few years, it's very pleasing to see that it's going to be restored. Stuart Dodd was another. Stuart Dodd had a black and white minstrel troupe, and they used to perform quite regularly in the parish hall and the fruit growers hall, which them days was on the top of the hill where our civic centre is today. The fruit growers hall was demolished to make way for our civic centre. Parish Hall, 1916, 1988. This was the home of many, many years of one of the plumbers of the district, Bill Taylor. Old Bill, as he was known, reared several children in this home. And it's typical, once again, of the many homes of that vintage built early 1900s. Bill's children are still around the district today. The prominent ones, of course, is Norm, who's in our local bowling club, and Wally, who for many years worked for Bailey's and Son, and then the latter years prior to his retirement worked for many years for the council. Right down the end now of Newton Road, Spearwood, where the Stock Road highway goes through, a little homestead that was built at the turn of the century and has been occupied to this day by the Sandage family, or in latter years I suppose you'd classify it as the Toppies. But Mr. Sandage brought up several children in this little home, which makes you wonder, why do people need such big homes today to bring up a family? Because there's no finer citizens could there be than the Sandage family. The children have all played their part in Coburn in one way or another. Fred, for many, many years, was secretary of the Spearwood Rovers Soccer Club. He was the youngest ever. At 17 years of age he was secretary, and a darn good one. Arthur for many, many years was a councillor. Vic, who passed away at a young age, was prominent also in the Spearwood Soccer Club. Stan also, and the girls have all played their part. Rose today is a big help to her husband, who is Councillor Lees. The Sandage Toppy family, Newton Road, Spearwood. St. Jerome's Church, the corner of Adeline Road and Rockingham Road in Spearwood. For over 50 years, this church was where all our Catholic friends attended. Just in the last year, a new church was built on the corner of Trude and Rockingham Road. A big new complex, church, schools and everything. So now the old churches are just used for specific occasions. The rear, which was all church land, has been sold, and that now is all home units. And a little further up the hill is where the original rectory was for the church. St. Jerome's Church for over 50 years. Did a marvellous job with the Catholic Parks home in Jandicott. Parks Road, backs onto the Angibup Lake. Up till a few years ago, was still in the hands of the Parkses, and the Parkses were here, occupied by the Parkses family for almost 100 years. Another of Coburn's heritage homes. I'm filming what is the remains of a mud brick home built over 100 years ago east of North Lake in Hope Road. Now these bricks were cut from the edge of the lake out of the mud, cut to the size and left in the sun to dry. Now there's a close-up shot of a brick. Now that brick was cut out of the mud on the edge of the lake over 100 years ago, and it's as hard as concrete. Now this is typical of the homes, and quite a few of them were built over 100 years ago around the Bibra North Lake area. And of course, many of the occupiers were Chinese. They had quite a number working in market gardeners around Bibra Lake. For this was termed as the Marchant House. Evidently it was in the last proprietor was people with the name of Marchant. Was recommended for restoration, but unfortunately it's a bit late now. Mud brick home, ruins, built over 100 years ago, east of Bibra Lake. As I stated in earlier filming, that in the early days Jandicott supplied 80% of Perth and Fremantle's market garden produce. The Collis family. The Collis family was another of the old pioneers of this district. Quite a large family Mr. and Mrs. Collis had. Mostly boys. I think they had one daughter who is in the Cockburn Bowling Club today with several of her brothers. But this is where they farmed for many years. Mr. Collis was a councillor and also worked on the Agricultural Society, the first of them at South QG. Once again, that home there, Mr. Collis brought up all his family. Why do we need such big homes today? Now the saying of a district without old homes and buildings is like a man with no memory. I'm filming this from the old fruit growers area where today's our civic centre stands, and how the area of Cockburn has developed over the years, considering it was in the 20s before we got electricity through the area, even into the late 30s before we got water through quite a bit of the area. You may recall when I was filming QG, the final little piece of sound in relation to 800 pounds, you no doubt are wondering what happened to it. Well, that 800 pounds assisted in the commencement of the Fremantle Golf Club. It was donated by the Fremantle Racing Club, which operated from QG. Top of the Fruit Growers Hill, originally all this land was owned by the Market Gardeners and Fruit Growers Association of Cockburn around about the 1920s. In 1924-5 they purchased the old medical wing of the Fremantle Hospital. Unfortunately, I have not got, as much as I tried, to get a true photo, but I had a couple of snapshots myself taken when the building was being demolished in the 70s. But it will give you some idea. In that building there was hundreds and hundreds of meetings held by the fruit growers and the Beale Rover Soccer Club. That was their headquarters for many, many years. And that is the building when it was almost demolished. On top of the Fruit Growers Hill, or where our civic centre is today, purchased by the people of the district, in other words the Fruit Growers and Market Gardeners Association, and erected on the hill that I'm filming in the 1920 era. Our district plaque, City of Cockburn. Our civic centre, built in the 70s on the site of the Market Gardeners and Fruit Growers Association's hall. The one I have just shown you being demolished in the 70s. It's our present day library. This is March 88. Administration building. Where this building stands is where the old Fruit Growers Hall was. We go across here to our function centre. And who are we to thank for this area? But our early pioneers. From a humble beginning to a second-hand purchase, the old medical wing of the Fremantle Hospital in the 1920s to these beautiful buildings in the 1970s. We'll be going shortly into interview two of our ex-councillors. We'll get their opinion on the many. I have with me here our ex-mayor Alan Thomas. No doubt you've seen Alan in two previous interviews, but Alan's ancestors came out from the Gilmore virtually as the founding of Fremantle days. So Al, could you fill us in a little bit on what took place them days?
Well, the start off of the Gilmore was that Beale was to take up a land grant out here, more or less on the Scanning River, and he had dealt with the people in England and gathered these people together, and on the assumption that when he got to Australia, Western Australia, that he would be given a grant of land on the Canning River. And my great-great-grandfather was one of the people that was one of his clerks that helped him organise the expedition out here. Unfortunately for Beale and his people, they were a fortnight late in arriving in the colony, and the land grant was given up. And so Beale was most upset about it, and after much dickering with the colonial secretary at the time, he was given another grant of land, which was at Clarence Rocks down here, just south of where we're sitting now. And you must imagine their despair when they eventually landed at Clarence Rocks in the middle of December in 1829. And virtually the place, with the exception of the development along the foreshore today, has little changed since the day they landed there. And you can imagine English people coming out here in our midsummer in 40-degree heat, they just didn't know what had hit them. And you can imagine their despair when they landed on the beach, and all they had there was a cliff of limestone rocks and little else. And unfortunately, Beale, being the leading man, he went a little bit off his head over the whole business, and being a country squire, the people that he had with him at that time looked to him to give them some direction in what they were to do. But he was of little or no help to them whatsoever. So you can imagine those people coming and landing all their goodies on the shore, which some of them had grand pianos and all the luxuries of the old country, which virtually they finished up chopping up for firewood and also building some rough shelters out of them to keep them away from the heat. And the whole expedition just fell apart. And the people in it, they either died there or they drifted apart. And the old great-great-grandfather, he eventually took off for New Zealand, I believe. Never heard of him again. But his son, John Thomas, he decided to stay here. Well, John was about 15. He teamed up with a fellow named William Gaze, and they went around the countryside looking for work. They was down at Jarradale, I believe. They got down there around that way somewhere, felling timber for different uses in the town of Fremantle. And eventually they got up into a block up on the Canning there, somewhere around about where Kelmscott is today. But the whole foundation of what was to be Clarence, which would have been, if had it been a go, it would have been more or less taken precedence over the city of Fremantle. But it just died, and nothing ever come of it.
Yeah. Well, that's good, Al. Thanks very much for that bit of history. Al is also a freeman of Cockburn, and we only have 4 freemen, and Alan is one, Don Miguel is another, Joe Cooper, our ex-chairman of the council, he's passed on, and the other we have with us today is the other freeman, councillor of many, many years, Mr. Wally Hagan. Hi, Wal. What's your history, Wal? When did you come to Cockburn? And I think, to my knowledge, you've been here well over 50 years anyhow, so you can perhaps fill us in a little bit, Wal.
Yes, unlike Alan, who was born here, my family came here as sponsored migrants in 1923. My mother had 5 sisters and a brother here, and we came then in February of 1923, in boiling heat to face up to a new country. My father, my mother and 6 boys arrived in Owen Road, which is right here in Hamilton Hill. We stayed in Owen Road for approximately 12 months, and then my father moved us on to away from the particular families that he probably didn't get along too well with, though later on everything sorted itself out. But we have been here since then. The 6 that we lost, unfortunately lost our mother in the first 2 years of being in Australia, and my father then had the job of bringing up 6 boys. The 3 elder ones moved on very quickly into employment. The 3 younger ones, of which I was the oldest, my brother Stan and Perce were the youngest. We went to school in first Hamilton Hill, then into Spearwood, went along, educated, more or less educated and kept ourselves, because my father at that time was out of work most times. The unemployment situation was very bad. And eventually, of course, we grew into manhood, moved around and married, had our different families. We all have decent families. We are now 72 strong in the Hagen, actual Hagen family. I was rather fortunate, I suppose, in as much as I eventually, after coercion by Alan Thomas, became a councillor of the city, and have enjoyed 21 good years with the city, seeing a great deal of progress. I retired 2 years ago in May, and now, of course, putting in my time with RSL work, community work, senior citizens, driving their bus, all sorts of other occupations just to that keeps a retired person mobile. And that's about the summary of my life and now the Hagen life. It's been very, very good to our family. This is Australia, and I believe there's no other place in the world like it.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Wal. I'll also be having to talk to you in weeks to come, because I want to do a documentary on the Spearwood Rovers, or the Cockburn United as it is now, soccer club. So no doubt I know that your brothers, etc., were the initial members of that, and so I'll be seeing you again shortly. But before you and Alan go anyhow, Wal and Alan, I'd like to ask you a few questions on the council from 1871 to 1988. So just bear with me for a few seconds, and then we'll get on to a different topic. But both Alan and Wal, more than thank you. I've got our ex-mayor Alan with me again, and Alan and Wally will fill us in a little bit on council virtually from day one. Just a general history and a general talk about things to keep us all in the picture of what took place over the years gone by. Okay, Al, what do you reckon about do we start off with governor law, or what's the setup? You take over, mate.
Well, actually, in the early days, I'm not too familiar with what happened here right from the very outset, but we were governed originally, as far as I know, by a Fremantle Road Board, which was more or less made up of members of the Fremantle Town Trust. That's where, unfortunately, we went down the drain a little bit there, because the members of the Fremantle Town Trust owned quite a lot of land in the Fremantle Road Board area, which we got to remember was 254 square mile in area of those days, and they were very loath to bring in a land tax or a rate tax, because it would have affected them in regard to the whole heap of land that they had here. So we more or less survived for many, many years on licences, like cart licences and dog licences, and I can remember in the past history of they employed a chap here to go around to collect the dog licences, and wherever he went, because he was working on a more or less a commission job, and wherever he went, the owner of the dog sold the dog onto him, and threatened he'd come back again, he'd blow his bloody head off. So he went back to the secretary of the board and told him that he was quitting. And the fellow said, why? He said, well, the very thing I'm going out to get you, he says, is being sold onto me by the owner. He said, and that's too risky for me. So I'm not going to get my head shot off. So we were pretty tough days those days.
That must have been this little story you told us the other day, Alan Rose, in relation to Andy Bailey getting fined.
Oh, yeah. Well, Andy, of course, he was a victim of circumstances too. Frank Chandler had a thing against Andy Bailey because he had this unlicensed cart. Of course, then we were governed from the police then from the Fremantle area, which was on horseback around these days. And old Frank finished up getting Andy because he hid behind a tree and waited while Andy drove the cart from one side of the road to the other. And then he pinched him for driving the cart on the public highway without a licence.
Yeah, a bit of revenue, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, but 15 bob I think it was to license the cart in those days.
And can you recall in relation to when the first Roads Board meeting was and perhaps who the councillors were them days?
Well, the councillors then, according to the sheet that I have here, were Mr Davis, Mr Duffield, Mr Harwood, Mr Herbert and Mr Bowie, I think it is the name. We had apologies from Mr Easton and Mr Jeffrey. Whether Mr Easton, the councillor, was a brother of Mr F Easton, the secretary, well, I wouldn't know about that, but that apparently was the original council. And that was in 1873 to 1888, with Secretary Easton coming in 1889 and holding his position till almost the end of the World War of 1917. He was 27 years as Secretary. Then, of course, Mr Sudlow, who I recall, when I was going to the Hamilton Hill School and Spearwood School, driving around in his, I'm not quite sure whether it's a Chev 4 car, you remember that, Stan? A Chev 4 car, and checking up on all his men here when the roads were being put in. Recalling at the same time that when we were going to school, we would see these 40 or 50, maybe up to 100 men on Hamilton Road, napping and spalling stone to make the road.
That was when it was a Rockingham Road, was it?
At that time it was Rockingham Road, and that, I believe, that foundation of that road in parts is still underneath that bitumen, and every bit of it was put in by hand.
Yeah.
Every man had his hammer, his napping hammer. My father was one of them.
Spalling
hammers and napping hammers, and putting every stone in by hand, and all the curbings were then big stones dug into the side of the road. Pretty tough time.
And the bitumen was Trinidad bitumen, was brought out here in barrels from...
Trinidad bitumen, yeah, in barrels.
Where did the Trinidad come from, Al?
Oh, it come from the West Indies. And we used to, when we were going to school, a hot day, it used to bubble up, and a little bubble, we used to pick it up and roll a little ball and chew it. Like chewing gum it was. It was a pretty horrible taste though, really, but it gave you something to chew on.
And my next recollection then was Mr Andrews on the map, yeah. And that rubbed off onto what we call now Cockburn, because there are many descendants of those particular families living in the Cockburn area now. Great-grandchildren and grandchildren.
And how long was Joe chairman for a while?
He was on the council for 24 years altogether.
On the council for 24 years and chairman 21, I think.
Oh, a long time, yeah. Most of the time he put on the council, he was either the president, the chairman or the mayor.
Yeah.
Because he went through the phases of the changes of the council, from the road board to the, from Fremantle Road Board to Cockburn Road Board, to Cockburn Shire, the town of Cockburn, and that's where Joe ceased there at the town of Cockburn.
And Al, when we reversed the Cockburn Road Board, when did we change from Fremantle?
We changed about 1961 from Fremantle Road Board to Cockburn Road Board.
Joe was chairman.
Yes.
Eugene Edwards was.
Eugene was then. Yeah. Going back to the earlier ones of Easton, Sudlow and Andrews, the funny thing about it those days, we couldn't afford a health inspector or a building inspector. So these gentlemen that were the secretaries of the council also had to be the building inspector and the health inspector.
And engineer.
And the engineer, yes. It wasn't until, quite late. It wouldn't have been, 10, 15 years ago we employed an engineer on the council. So, you know, we've made some pretty huge strides. Originally, we were always dependent on Fremantle mostly for our library, clinic, immunisation clinic, and most of all our shopping in Fremantle was always done because there was nowhere else out here to go. And over the years, through a parochial attitude of the councillors that have come and gone in this council, we decided we'd cut the apron string, so we've got everything now that Fremantle have got. Kindergartens, immunisation clinics, we've got our own immunisation clinics, our own district MO, and we're self-sufficient now, really.
That's good. Wally, when do you think was the big transition? In the 50s? 50s, 60s?
Yes, between I'd say
45.
Well, 45 it started to move.
Just after the last war.
When the young soldiers came out and began building, and most of them did exactly what I did myself. They built a garage with a lean-to on it and a septic toilet, and lived in these places for many years while you were building your house, and that is when Cockburn really came alive. It was practically every odd block had these garages on, with people living in them and living quite happily too, and bringing up families in them until they could afford to build a house.
Yeah, I made a statement, Alan Wally, when I filmed the Sandwich residence and the old Collis residence, that two parents that brought up big families, they didn't need a 5-bedroom and you name it, and a $250,000 home as they are building today, yet they survived and were very happy, weren't they?
They were that.
Yeah, well, actually, the two big booms in our district here was Baker's Estate, which the State Housing Commission kicked off, and Coolborough. They were the two big housing booms which put us apart from, say, a 10,000 population to within the vicinity of 30,000 people within 10 years.
And I think all that land was originally the Bakers and Dixons, if I remember rightly.
Down in Bakers,
I think the Dixons in the 1840s, and then around about the turn of the centuries, the Bakers came in and bought quite a lot of land.
Yeah, well, Jane L. Baker bought that heap of land where the Baker's Estate is today. They use it for a rendering place, byproducts, and a small abattoir there.
That's where the Hagen Pavilion is today.
Well, the Wally's Pavilion is a little bit west of where the actual abattoirs were. The actual abattoirs were up around about where the shopping centre is in Baker's Estate.
Oh, yeah, that's on the south side.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they would have been interesting days, wouldn't they? And now, what happened in the latter years, Al, in relation to becoming a city and town, or whatever you like to say? And
well, we were made a town by Les Logan in 1971. That was the beginning of our Pioneers Dinner. That 71 turnout, which we commemorated that in the Memorial Hall, and we carried on from there on, and every year since we've done the right thing by our pioneers, the district, with a pioneers get together on Foundation Day.
Yeah, that's excellent, because I know I'm one that attended, and I thoroughly look forward to it each year.
And then 79, of course, in November of 79, we'd become a city.
Yes, now, right, now your mayoral duties, when did they commence and when did they finish?
I can remember the night that it commenced. It was the 13th of June, 1970. Well, I'm not too sure when it started, and 79 it finished.
Yeah. Yes, anyhow, Al, it's beautiful to have both you and Wally here. Next week I'll be interviewing Don and the present mayor with our town clerk and assistant town clerk. So what we've missed today, no doubt they'll be able to fill us in on. But more than thank you, the pair of you, for coming to giving us an insight into the history of Cockburn. Thanks, Al. Thank you, Wally.
Thank you.
At the conclusion of our tape, on the history of Cockburn, 1829 to 1988. I have me here three gentlemen that played a big part in Cockburn over the latter years. We have our Mayor, Councillor Don Miguel. We have our City Manager, Tony Amerigo, Assistant City Manager, Mr. Rod Brown. Now what can you tell us, Tony, about the history over the years?
Well, I think the first, I'll give a bit of the background of local government. Local government was brought into the state officially in 1871, and where the Fremantle District Road Board was instituted by government. They had their first meeting at Mrs. Mary Hyam in Fremantle on the 6th of February 1971. During the first year of its existence, the board held its committee meetings at Mrs. Hyam's home, and lectures meetings were held at the Oddfellows Hall in Fremantle. The original Roads Board district was bounded on the north by the Swan River from Fremantle to the mouth of the Canning River, on the east by the line from Bull Creek to the junction of Bunbury and Albany roads at the Narrogin Inn. On the south by line from the Narrogin Inn to and including the Rockingham town site, and the west by the sea coast. In 1877, the Fremantle District Road Board moved into its first office in High Street, Fremantle, sharing them with the Fremantle Town Council, and in subsequent years had offices in Adelaide Street and South Terrace, Fremantle, before building its own offices in Forest Road, Hamilton Hill in 1922. Fremantle District Roads Board continued in existence from 1871 to 1955, where a district referendum favoured the change of name to the Cockburn District Roads Board, underlining the desire for recognition of the district independence of Fremantle. Also in July 1923, the boundaries of the Fremantle District Roads Board were extended to include part of Jandakot Roads Board district and were fixed at what are approximately today's boundaries. Jandakot Roads Board had been in existence from 1892, when it was formed to serve the needs of the newly opened Jandakot agricultural area, and its fortunes fluctuated with those of that venture. By 1923, the Public Works Department had decided that the Jandakot District Roads Board was no longer viable and disbanded the board. Fremantle District Roads Board now had twice the length of roads and only a marginal increase in revenue. Now, further to this, for historical values, Fremantle Road Board was in existence from 1871, from its inception, to 1954. Immediately following the referendum, the area was named the Cockburn District Road Board, and that was served from 1955 to 1960. Then, from a change of act and a change of legislation, the Roads Board was dedicated as a Cockburn Shire Council, and that was in existence from 1961 to 1970. Then the district raised into status as a town in 1971, and that was served till 1974, and finally increased further status as a city in 1979 to date.
That's very interesting, Tony, isn't it?
It is very interesting indeed.
Quite interesting too, Alan, is that the ward boundaries originally came into Cockburn in 1913, when the road district itself was divided into wards. There were several amendments to the boundaries that have occurred over the years, and I suppose the most significant was in 1976, when North Ward itself was split into two wards, creating West Ward and North Ward. This year, actually, through a ministerial direction of being a policy of government, it was decided that the council would have to create and disband its wards to make representation based on a situation of equal voter representation per councillor, and as a result of that we found some major changes again occurred with the disbanding of what was called Central Ward and South Ward, and the new wards of
Coastal Ward and South Ward created.
Yes, there's certainly been some changes since 1829, isn't there?
Most
One way and another.
Yes, there most certainly has, Alan, and I guess if you were to take it, population changes have been fairly dramatic over those periods, and perhaps the Mayor might like to comment on those.
Don, before you start, there's just one point. I think your ancestors came out here pretty well some of the first years of our history, did they not?
Yes, Alan, about 1870, I think the year was, on the ship the Robert Morrison. Grandfather came out with Salvado, and there's quite a lot of interesting history there if one was to delve into one's ancestors, particularly on the mother's side. She was born actually, my grandmother was, and
therefore, getting back to populations then, Don.
Well, Mum used to go to Greenbushes on the old stagecoach. Matter of fact, I had a stagecoach change down at Greenbushes for some time, so she could speak about that at length if she was here, but bless her, she isn't. However, getting back to Cockburn, I can only speak really of about the last 30-odd years, and the town clerk and assistant town clerk have mentioned the dates of municipalities and boards and when things changed. But I think the most significant thing really is, I guess it started with a shock I got many years ago with the previous town clerk, Mr. Edwards. I went down underneath the building in the old council chambers down at Forest Road, and I often heard talk of it's in the archives, it's in the files down below, etc. When you go down there to see the history that's laying on the shelves, and I guess anybody with enough interest, and I'm not saying there aren't some presently around us, but if they had the time to go through it book by book, I can remember him bringing up certain volumes and talking about an income of £6 and £8, and I think I went to £12 the last time it was mentioned. And you look at £12 for a district like this and a population of, in say possibly the 1,000 thereabouts, and now you look at 44,000 people and talk about a revenue of about 12 million all up. I think that signifies an enormous change, and I think it's worth noting that it's only just this last year that councillors saw fit to create a new archives building, appropriately fireproofed and everything, out in the new depot out there, where all these books and records are going to be stored, taken out there and stored for posterity. In some cases time has taken its toll. In some cases a lot of the information has been put on microfiche, and much work has been done by staff to achieve that, and it would have been an enormous pity to see all that accidentally destroyed or whatever. But the years and years of history there, the white roads, I can remember even the old white road out to Bibra Lake, and the white roads that were in the Jandicott area, the old stone roads. And I guess if you look at my short lifespan and my involvement and think back to the years that the city manager was talking, yes, there's been tremendous changes, absolutely tremendous. My ward alone now in the West Ward has been broken down in size, and yet it boasts something like about 14,000 people. Now, when I started with the council, I think Mr. City Manager, we only had about 8,000 people here, I think, 6,000 to 8,000.
Yes, when I started with the council in 1962, the population then was 7,007, and as the Mayor mentioned, it's grown up to 44,000 in population. There has been a tremendous development, mainly in residential and certainly also in industrial, but the largest development in the city was in the mid-70s, when the State Housing Commission started to develop East Hamilton Hill and also the Corbel region. And in those days, statistics prove that the Cockburn district at the time was the largest, fastest growing municipality in the whole of the nation of Australia. And these days were the hectic days of the district, where work was done The workers used to work 7 days a week to catch up with development, provision of roads, provision of recreation facilities and so forth.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's probably been a big change in staff too, Rod?
Yes, Alan, well, since my time, I guess we probably had about, an inside staff, probably around about 15 people, I guess, in those days, and this is going back 20 years ago. Now we're looking at down around about 80 people associated with the inside staff, and all up we're looking at around about 230 people working for the council today's times.
Yeah, so you can see why it warrants a 12 million turnover.
Yes, well, Alan, there's a lot of work to be done out there, and it takes people to do it, as we all know.
Yes, I think also, Alan, if I could just quote you this little bit here, and it might signify some change. In August 1920, a committee made up of John Dowse, Edwin Follington and Herbert Parrott reported to the board on possible sites for its new offices. The committee mentioned a 1 acre block next to Eisted's store, another block near the Newmarket Hotel, and a small block next to the Hamilton Hills School. A block known as the Peak at the junction of Forest and Rockingham roads, and strongly recommended a 5 acre block midway between Blackwood Avenue, Owen Road, belonging to Major Victor Manning. This block was on level ground and was offered to the board for £40 an acre, £100 down, and the balance over 3 years at 5%. It's difficult not to smile when I look at these figures compared to what we talk now. A referendum was held in October 1920 to choose a site for the new office, and the Peak was chosen by a majority of 23 votes. Now, you look at that, £40 an acre, now you'd probably be talking, what, $80,000? 80, 90,000, possibly even more an acre. I think when you look at that, and you talk about change, it's a pity that I couldn't really go into depth ad lib of what all those changes have been. But seeing this and knowing what is involved now in the price of land, a little block of land now looking something like 800 square metres or 750 square metres. People now are clamouring for them at $26,000 per block. Here we talk about £40 an acre. It's incredible. I think it's incredible. I think it signifies the future that Cockburn has, the long way it's come from those old days when we go back to looking for a site. And it's also interesting to note when we talk about sites for a civic centre or a administration block. Here we have this one here has been up something like about 9 years. It cost, I think at the time, was about $1.2 million. About 9 years, and now the staff are almost bursting at the seams in the place. We've had to extend rooms, add partitions, and it's almost now not big enough. We have to look very, very shortly to another increase. So that might help to try and understand the incredible pace with which Cockburn has developed, particularly over the last 15 odd years. And if the experts are right, from about 43,000 population at the moment, we look to something like about 73,000 population in the year 2000. So it's just incredible pace, difficult to keep up with.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, I think we've covered all the main topics. Unless you gentlemen have got anything on the side to add to, you might have a joke or you might have some funny incidents that happened over the years. But if not, well, all I can say is, Your Worship, more than thanks for giving us the information that you have to go on record, and also to you, City Manager, Tony, and also to you, Rod, our Assistant City Manager. So, since our first fleet arrived in Australia, whilst the reenactment fleet is arriving in Sydney at this moment, we are all here for a barbecue breakfast and festivities to celebrate our 200th birthday. And what a place to celebrate it. Where our Civic Centre now stands is, for many, many years, was the Fruit Growers Market Gardens Association's headquarters. And the boys preparing the barbecue breakfast. We've lived and died, all this great land. People of Cockburn here will be enjoying it on this fastidious day. I sailed the sea in search of Beale, being in the city of Cockburn, OBE. To see all the smiling faces. I sheared the sheep all golden. Been counsellor for many years. Wife and family. Rose born and bred in Beale. I may never be a boy in the town of the land, but I'll fall.
Let's take your bloody jacket.
No, we had a
I haven't seen him laying out in his couch at the front there yet.
No, you won't see him out there, I don't think. Yeah. Now you going, Brian?
Good, I'm good, mate.
Yeah, I'm good.
You're probably laying on his couch at night after walking up and down all those steps all day.
I don't know, he's only 65 and he can run up and down at his age. Pretty young.
He's younger than him, or older?
He's older than me.
All right, he's only... Come on, have a bit of face, mate.
At the moment, most seated, having breakfast. Again. Guaranteed all over 60 years. Way back years ago.
Morning, Alan.
Morning. Steve, another one born and bred in Beale. Also a good counsellor. Can I enjoy that, Wal?
Just cover the bacon.
of January 1988. It's up to you, Brian.
It's a very great pleasure on behalf of the city, the councillors and staff, that I welcome you to our bicentennial celebration. I know it is hot. I thank God for the fine weather. I thank him even more that I have a dais to make this speech from. I guess, quicker. It would be amiss not to reflect a little on the country's coming to 200-year celebration. A country that has started 200 years ago been through 5 wars, or participated in 5 wars, a country that has achieved an awful lot, particularly in one little aspect. If you ask people how a country of this size with such a small population can have such enormous mileage of roads with the very few people that we have. And that's an incredible achievement on its own. We have enjoyed for the 200 years a high sense and a high degree of democracy on the past, resolution for the future, and reconciliation for where we may have gone wrong. We've perhaps looked too much to materialism, personal gratification, and with that we may have become a little selfish. I think one must, if one thinks rationally, look at the original inhabitants and ask, have we given them a fair go? And I'm not going to dwell on it at length, but I'll make this point. As much as we have given them and tried to bring them to our way of life, our society, it's my personal view that a lot of that has been wasted, and we haven't really addressed the Aboriginal for what he is, the type of person he is, and tried to address his issues. Take time to give them what I believe is warranted, a little more social justice and the type of justice that they really deserve. We found that we have the ability to deplete our forests, to pollute our shores, and make our waterways a wonderful country. And I believe we should look with enthusiasm to the future for it. We should be enthusiastic about making it better, enthusiastic about participating in democracy in its real sense, in social justice in its real sense, and development in our natural assets with rational thinking adopted to progress, not just for the sake of a mighty dollar. We have the ability to feed half the world. We have the ability to share more than we do. We have those incorrigible idiots who suggest that some are not acceptable as migrants. I suggest to you that we have broken down through our society the natural marriage function to a very large extent. We have made it so warranted that we seek materialism and personal pride that we forgot about family, and yet we deny those, some of us, not all of us, thank God, we deny those who want to come here to start a new life. Some of us would deny them entry. Thank God they're not here today either. So let us look forward to the future with total enthusiasm. We have much to celebrate, I repeat, and I know it's hot, so I won't keep you at great length. Near to this time, 200 years ago today, a small landing party came ashore at Sydney Cove, and the modern history of this tremendously exciting continent commenced. The Union Jack was hoisted, while 4 measures of porter were drunk to the success of the colony. Then the Marines fired a third de joie, and the whole group gave 3 cheers. Australians all, I'd ask you to charge your glasses and stand with me for 1 minute while we silently reflect on the achievements of those 200 years, the quality of life we enjoy today, and we also pay tribute to those who made the supreme sacrifice. We must never forget those men who went to bear arms, fight for what we have to enjoy now, and preserve the quality of life that we have. The national anthem will be sung as our flag is hoisted, and I will then ask you to join me in the toast to the next 200 years. And those who believe in the reincarnation, I'll be back with you to see it.
Australians, all let us rejoice.
peu de joie.
Uno más. Another one. 6, which
Make. Safe. Party. Shoulder. Arm.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now ask you to join with me in 3 cheers for Australia and what we have achieved and what we're going to achieve in the future. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Australia! I thank all of you for your attendance. I do hope as many as possible can stay for the citizenship ceremony.
I'm standing now at the entry to our Civic Centre on the direct spot where the old Fruit Growers Hall used to be. The old Fruit Growers Market Gardens Association, each year they would display everything from vegetables grown by the Smarts, the Douse, the Torsagas, the Jeroviches, the Dobras, just to name a few. The poultry was displayed in cages on the side of the hall on the veranda. Peaches displayed by the Baron Brindles, George Goodchild and others, plus a mixture of fruit. Grapes throughout this area were really terrific growers. One of the best displays was put on by the Aberley family, who had quite a business on sultanas and raisins exporting. Down around behind the hall, down around the parking area and the bowling club area today is where the racetrack went in a circle right around that area, and on that specific day of the year they used to have races of all sorts, from running to horses, etc. In other words, it was quite a gala day for all to enjoy in the 1920s. So you can just imagine the activity that the old fruit growers area brought to the district. But no doubt the activity today with our Civic Centre, administration block, etc., would be busy at any rate at all times. from our first offices in Adelaide Street, High Street, in Fremantle, to the 1922 building of our Fremantle Roads Board offices, what they classified as the Peak, corner of Forest and Rockingham Road. We've certainly come a long way with this beautiful concept here today. It's certainly a time to remember.
I'd like to thank all those that have helped me compile this film. Special thanks to His Worship the Mayor, Mr. Don Miguel, City Manager, Mr. Tony Amerigo, Assistant City Manager, Mr. Rod Brown, Alan Thomas, our ex-mayor, Wally Hagan, Stan Saul, Mr. Savella and his daughter Frances, and Alfie Hines. Haven't we today a lovely district? From the disastrous start back in 1829 with the first gazetted town site of Clarence, yes, the strength and determination shown by our early pioneers, carried on by the residents and councillors of latter years, have all played their part in the making of our City of Cockburn. To those I have left out of this video, I apologise with regret, as there are families in Cockburn who could make a complete video on their family history. I hope you have learned something of our district of Cockburn, and wouldn't our pioneers be proud today if they could see the district they helped to create. I've had great pleasure in making this documentary on our district of Cockburn, 1829 to 1988. Thank you for viewing, and God bless. Our district, 1988.
Is the mainspring of human activity. If there's an ocean, we cross it. If there's a disease, we cure it. If there is a wrong, we right it. And if there's a mountain, we climb it.